Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody? Good, good. I'm Mel Lyons, Senior Program Director with the AMA and part of your conference programming team. And on behalf of the AMA, it's a pleasure to welcome you to concurrent session number 101, Improving Self-Esteem Through Effective Thinking. On your chairs, you found the traditional evaluation sheet, and if you'd want to take just one quick second to put down session 101, Improving Self-Esteem Through Effective Thinking. This session will run until 5:15, and we invite you all to please join us at 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock on the riverboat ride on the Creole Queen. It's going to be very exciting, plenty of food, plenty of good friendship, so please make sure that you join us there. Our presenter today is Dr. Gerald Kushel, who is also the author of Effective Thinking for Uncommon Success, and you'll find this little handy-dandy tipster down in the bookstore, so if you get a chance, go down there and browse and take a look at that. Dr. Kushel is the president of ExecuPower Associates, a management consulting firm located out on Long Island, New York, and although they're located on the island, his travels take him the full gamut of the U.S. He specializes in corporate team building as well as executive effectiveness seminars. His client base are such customers as IBM, as well as Metropolitan Life. He's a former executive with New York Life and a regional manager with them, and also has worked with Williams Jennings Company. He works also in public personnel service for the Teaneck Public Schools. Please join with me in welcoming to the platform Dr. Gerald Kushel.
Thank you very much for the applause in advance. It's good to collect your credits while you have the opportunity, and I very much appreciate your support for my self-esteem. The topic today is self-esteem and how to get more of it. Realistic self-esteem, not this bravado self-love where you're kissing yourself all the time. I know a man who was involved in a triangle. He and his wife were in love with the same guy. He had great self-esteem. He was madly in love with himself. Now, self-esteem that we're talking about is the kind that leads to greater productivity. And we did recently a research of 1,200 top executives. And all of these top executives, well, they weren't all top executives. They were workers in business and industry. Many of them were top executives, but not all of them. And out of these 1,200, all of them were considered to be a high performer, highly productive. And of course, we know that there's a self-esteem productivity cycle. This has been established through research. The greater one's self-esteem, if it's realistic, the more one is productive. And then the cycle becomes very easily, the more you are productive, the better you feel about yourself, and consequently it increases your self-esteem. So there is a cycle. What do you do to create that cycle in your business or your industry or in your circumstances when the cycle just isn't there because productivity might be insufficient or just people just aren't feeling very good about themselves, primarily, I would suppose, because of the very difficult times we're having in our economy? Well, I'd like to share with you the effective thinking method, which is my specialty. Effective thinking, which is different than positive thinking. Positive thinking is very good, no question about it. You've all utilized positive thinking, and we know about the work of Dr. Norman Vincent Peale and the power of positive thinking. But in business and industry, that's sometimes insufficient, especially if positive thinking is Pollyannish. You know, man heard going by the 40th floor of the World Trade Center saying, so far, so good. That's positive thinking, but it's not necessarily useful. What I'd like to talk to you about is something we call rock management thinking, or results-oriented cognition thinking, or more practically, thinking for results. In this study of 1,200 people, let me share with you some of the data on this study very briefly. I think you'll find it quite interesting, if I can get this off here. There we go. There we go. Can you see that? 1,200 high performers. And out of the 1,200 high performers, every one of them, 16% were deemed to be self-defeating. And let me tell you why. we gave each and every one of these 1,200 high performers a job satisfaction inventory to find out if they were genuinely enjoying their work. And those of you and I who are in human resource work know that job satisfaction isn't always equivalent to productivity. Some people are very good at what they do, but after a while they have burnout and they're a prisoner of their own capacities. I knew a fellow who was a dermatologist on Long Island who was one of the most successful dermatologists who had gotten to the point where he could not stand people who had faces that were with blemishes. He just couldn't stand seeing another face with a blemish anymore. And he became a drug-dependent individual in order to go to work. Now, it sounds rather silly, but it's true that you can be very good at what you're doing and then become a prisoner of your own capabilities. 16% were self-defeating not only because they weren't enjoying their work, even though they were highly productive, but in addition, we gave them a personal life satisfaction inventory in order to estimate whether or not they were enjoying their personal life. And guess what? This 16%, although they weren't enjoying their jobs, weren't enjoying their personal life either. It's like Dizzy Dean used to say in baseball, although he can't hit, he can't field either. They had it very bad. They looked great on the outside, dressed for success, red tie, red handkerchief, looking sharp, and inside, a mess. For all intents and purposes, I could be one of those individuals. It's very hard to ascertain with some people whether or not on the inside they're functioning in optimal fashion. And that's what we were looking at. Internal success as well as external success. You know that there are people who are material millionaires and are psychological paupers, don't you? And you know that there are some people who are not millionaires but who are psychological millionaires. They have a way of looking at things that's very, very good. Well, in this group of 16%, 189 out of our study of 1,200 self-defeating individuals, this was really sad, but there was an 80% group, which wasn't so sad. The 80% group up there, 961 of our 1,200 people under study, in terms of people who were high performers and you would presume had high self-esteem, 80% were semi-successful. And that's where probably most of us fit in. Trade-offs. You say, well, if I'm going to be very good at my job and I'm going to give it 100%, which is a 50, 60-hour week, I'll have to trade off. I may have to sacrifice my personal life. You've heard people say that. You may have said that. You may have been very good at what you do for a living and really enjoyed it, and then trade it off. Or you might have, if you were in the semi-successful group, said, look, I'm good at what I do, and I do it for bread. I really don't like these meetings. I don't like dressing for success. I can't wait to go home to be in my garden and with my friends and, play a little golf or be with my kids, my husband, whatever. That's a trade-off too. High performance. Every one of the 1,200 were high performers, but in addition, mediocre job satisfaction and maybe very high level personal life satisfaction. That could be you. I would estimate that 80% of the people sitting in this room right now are in that category. If you can transfer the data from this research into the general population, and I think you can. In fact, I think that these percentages are greater in terms of the negative side for the general population, because don't forget, all of these people, at the very least, were high performers. And yet, 16% self-defeating, 80% semi-successful. Now, mathematically, that leaves what? 16% and 80%? 4%. And guess what? That 4%, those 50 people were what I would call, for want of a better term, uncommonly successful. It's not uncommon to be a high performer. I would estimate most everybody in this room is pretty good at what they're doing for a living. It's not that uncommon. I mean, we're special, if I put myself in that category, we're special succeeding people, but it's not uncommon for that to happen. It's also not uncommon for a person to have a high level of job satisfaction. And it's not uncommon for an individual to have a high level of personal life satisfaction. But what is uncommon is to have all three dimensions. So this 4% group had three-dimensional success. They had high self-esteem. And I'd like to talk about that 4% group, because I studied each and every one of those 50 people, uncommonly successful people. I mean, I was interested in the pathology of the self-defeating individual. They make very good novels, very good case studies. Fascinating, you know them. They're very interesting. The world would be a less interesting place without neurotics and borderline psychotics. You know that. Excuse me. And the 80% group, that's where most of us say you have to be. But the truth of the matter is, there is a 4% group, and you know it. You know, we all know some people, whatever they touch works. Even when it's wrong, it works. They're usually in the right place at the right time. Not only that, they enjoy their job even though the job is rotten. I mean, they work for crazy people and it doesn't bother them. You know that. There are people where they are in crazy situations where it shouldn't even work out and it works out. And when they go home, they got crazy wives and kids or crazy husbands and kids, and it still doesn't bother them. They love them. They love them. They're out of it. They're in outer space somewhere. And they're not on cocaine, they're not on drugs, they're not on alcohol. You know what it is? We study these people, and guess what? Each and every one of these uncommonly successful people, and I think you'll find this fascinating and understandable. Even if you didn't do the study, you could figure it out for yourself. Each and every one of these uncommonly successful people, their secret was, now it took me 10 years to get this information, their secret was, I'm not going to give it away. After 10 years, why should I stand here and give it away? Their secret was, what do you think? What do you think? Why don't you have a conversation with the person near you, 2 or 3 people, and see if you can guess, before I tell you the great discovery that I made from this research, what the secret was for being uncommonly successful, for having 3-dimensional success. And if you're in that category, if you're in the 4% group, don't give it away. Okay, would you talk to pick 1 or 2 people near you and have a little conversation about what you think it is? Let's see what you're thinking. Is anyone, what's their secret? What's your secret if you're in the 4% group? Or what is the secret? Yes, sir, I see somebody out there. They like themselves. They like themselves. That's true. They did. They like themselves. But that wasn't the secret. That was an outcome of what they were doing that produced sufficient self-esteem. So that was an outgrowth, but it wasn't the activity that produced this 3-dimensional success, but it's certainly on the right track. They had a mission. They had a sense of a mission. There's nothing worse than being aimless and not knowing what you're doing. That also was a product of what they were doing. It wasn't the secret. Now, it may be because what we're dealing with is semantics. You and I know that there are only 15 or 20 verities floating around in various religions, theologies, psychologies. And if you hear one speaker, you heard another speaker, they all sound alike after a while. Different packaging for powerful ideas. And that's what I have to share with you. Their secret was to take total, and I mean total. Write this down, that's good. Total. 10 years, you have to write this down, 1 sentence. Kills me to give it away. I was almost never going to tell anyone. Total, 100%, total self-responsibility. Total, 100%. Not 99 and 44, 100%. 100% self-responsibility. Now that sounds a bit Pollyannish, doesn't it? After all, how can you be self-responsible in this crazy world? Well, the truth is, each and every one of these uncommonly successful executives and workers was chief executive officer, even though they might have been the blue-collar workers in the plant. Chief executive officers in charge of the world from the neck up. I'm chief executive officer in charge of the world from the neck up. I take total 100% self-responsibility for what? You know what? The thoughts that I choose. I take 100% self-responsibility for the thoughts, not that you're choosing, but the thoughts that I choose. You could be very bored right now, and the reason you're bored is not because of me, it's because of the thoughts you're choosing. Who chooses your thoughts? Who chooses your thoughts? One fellow says, my mother chooses my thoughts. I said, I'm a therapist, I'll treat your mother, you'll get better. He said, right. He said, you should meet my mother. But the truth of the matter is, that's the only thing that you and I do. We choose our own thoughts. That's the one power that we have. The one power that Viktor Frankl was in a Nazi concentration camp. Now, you probably read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read it, it's a very small little book. If he could enjoy a concentration camp, you can enjoy where you're working. He found a way of surviving in a concentration camp. And he wrote in that book, the ultimate, why are you laughing? That's not funny, it's a concentration camp. No respect. Uncommonly successful people take total self-responsibility. And he wrote in that book, Man's Search for Meaning, the ultimate freedom of man, you remember it, the ultimate freedom of man is to choose one's attitude. You know, that the Nazis or anybody else, they can make you sit a certain way, they can shave your head, they can tell you what to think, but they can't make you think anything you don't want to think. What goes on in your head is your business. Nobody knows exactly what you're thinking. I can tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you right now to think of a green aardvark. And you could say, okay, I'm doing it. And you could be thinking of a blue aardvark or a naked person or whatever you want to think about. Nobody knows. You can go to a boring meeting and not be bored. And you can look as bored as the next guy, but be thinking anything you want. In fact, the uncommonly successful executives have learned to go to meetings and look like they're suffering, just so they could get their pay, but they weren't suffering. Walk fast, look angry, and think about sex. You could do anything you want. One fellow was managing a plant that way. That's what he was doing. And he said, he says, I'm a symbol. And I know that I'm a symbol, and my body's got to be at certain places, and I have to look a certain way, but I don't have to think. I can think anything I want. And I pay attention to the parts that make sense, and I tune out the parts that don't make sense. And there are some things you should pay a lot of attention to, and there's a lot that you shouldn't listen to. A woman, I asked, what's the secret of your long marriage? She had been married 35 years. And she said, the secret of my marriage, she was very happily married, the secret of my marriage is I pretend I'm listening. Now that sounds funny, but that's my wife. The truth is that today is my 35th wedding anniversary. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you. That's an achievement, yes. This day and age, that's an achievement. And next year I'm going to start listening, just see what's going on. The truth of the matter is, uncommon success is available for anyone that wants to take self-responsibility. Now let's talk about thoughts and what they produce, because we're talking about effective thinking for producing self-esteem. Thoughts produce all, not a sum, all of your feelings. All of your feelings. If you're angry, it's because you're choosing anger-producing thoughts, correct? Absolutely. Other people do not make you angry. It's your thoughts about other people that make you angry, correct? It's absolutely correct. Your boss does not depress you. It's your thoughts about your boss that depress you. Right. Why are you laughing? Your boss, this is on television. You're going to be in big trouble. You can choose any thought you want. Why do you choose thoughts about situations which will upset you? Well, there are times to get depressed, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because effective thinking, which I will be sharing with you, includes creative depression, which can be very effective, creative worry, which can be very useful, creative anxiety, which can help you get the job done, and none of those are positive, but they're effective. Results-oriented thinking is thinking which produces the results you're after. So in order to do results-oriented thinking, I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that it is critical, it is absolutely essential that you know the results you're after. Guess what the results were that the uncommonly successful people of my actually international research study, guess what the results were that they were after? What they got. They wanted. They knew in advance they were going to enjoy their job. They were determined to. One guy said, I'm going to enjoy my job. I spent 40, 50, 60 hours there. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not staying here forever. Believe me, part of me is aware of what's going on, but I'm not internalizing some of the nonsense. I'm paying attention to the stuff that makes sense. And when I'm working, I enjoy my work and I'm productive. I'm getting out of here as soon as I can, but I use creative self-deception in order to function in this environment. Creative self-deception, I said, what's that? But you know what creative self-deception is, because there are people who have been in prisons who have survived. One fellow recently in the Vietnam War, not so recently, not so long ago, but long enough ago, was in a prison, and he played golf every day in the prison without golf clubs, with his imagination. And they released him from prison. He was emaciated, and they said, what would you like, a meal, something? He says, no, take me to a golf course. And they took him to a golf course, and he played better golf than he did before he went to prison, because he practiced every day, because the mind produces your feelings and your behavior. Now, you know this from cognitive psychology. A good friend of yours has died, and you're not depressed because you don't know anything about it. 2 days later, you get a fax. Charlie died. Now you're depressed. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you this question. What depressed you, Charlie's death or your thoughts about Charlie's death after his death? And in this case, certainly, obviously, in that illustration, very carefully selected, of course, It's your thoughts after the event, not the event. But you know what? That's true about everything. As I say, if you're listening to me and you're finding what I'm saying entertaining, it's partly because you're choosing entertaining thoughts. We are not responsible for the whole world. We are chief executive officers, says the uncommonly successful person who has self-esteem and has created it through effective thinking. Chief executive officer is in charge of the world from the neck up. Your thoughts produce your feelings and your behavior. Neither he, she, it, he, the boss, the problem employee, the drunkard, the spouse, neither he, she, and I could run through the same thing. She, it, meaning the company, society, the economy, it, or they, all those people other than us, right? They, ever makes me feel or act in a particular way, says the uncommonly successful person. The person that has true self-esteem, effective self-esteem, is what I would like to call it. None of those things make me feel or act in a particular way. Rather, it's the thoughts that I and I alone choose that do the trick, that make me feel terrific. This is bad poetry. Me feel terrific or me get sick. But the concept is powerful. It's really powerful. Now, it's not just a cute little idea. If you take this to the point of being a fanatic about it, you can immediately join the 4% Club. That 4% Club is available to every person in this room, regardless of your past psychosocial history. All you have to do is break mindset. But the problem is that all people are hypnotized. How many of you, and you're in the human resources field, how many of you are familiar with the work of Ivan Pavlov, the Russian psychologist, the bell and the conditioned response? How many of you are familiar with that? Who asked you to raise your hand? I want to know. Who asked you to raise your... Look at us. We are zombies. This is what we do. We are conditioning this way, that way. We fall right in line. I'll ask you a question, if you'll go along with this, okay? Another name for a policeman starts with a P, or starts with a C, ends with a P. A rabbit, when it jumps up and down, bunny, no, starts with an H and ends with a P, right? Another name for one's father starts with a P, Pop. First thing you do when you come to a green light, stop. She stops at green lights, and it's people like that that cause all our problems. No, it was a setup. It was a setup. It was a setup. Now, what I'm saying is that you and I, we all get set up. We get set up. Now, those are just small illustrations of how you and I are programmed. We are programmed. And if the program is working, you don't have to fix it. But if the program isn't working, then you fix it. I knew a fellow who was ugly. Very ugly person. Why are you looking at me? I'm not talking about... This person was very ugly. He was the ugliest guy in college where I went, and he thought he was very attractive. And he used to walk around with a mellifluous voice. He had lots of girlfriends. He was president of the fraternity. Very ugly, never knew it, and did very well. Had very high self-esteem, never faced reality. The program was in his subconscious, which got there in the first 5 or 6 years of life. Apparently his mother, father, relatives, friends told him, you know, you're a terrific kid, you're wonderful, and that got in there. There are people who are very attractive who don't feel that they are. There are people who are high achievers who don't feel they'll ever be very good because of that early program. We know that. I saw the same fellow 25 years later in Manhattan, pulled up in a large car, still looked the same, showed me pictures of his kids. They look like him. Aren't they beautiful, he was saying? I mean, not face, this is creative self-deception taken to an extreme. But the man has had 25 great years. Now, the trick is to take your subconscious and program it to your advantage if it's not working for you. And I'd like to talk to you about how you can take any employee that comes to you or yourself and reprogram your subconscious if it's not working. If it's working, don't fix it. If you think you're attractive and you're not, leave it that way. But if you're like me, you think you're ugly and you're attractive, do something about it. We did some research to ask people, what gives you self-esteem? These people all had high self-esteem. And we found three ingredients. Calm, inner calm. Can you imagine having a great life and being nervous and jerky on the inside? Fellow says, I used to be nervous and jerky, but I'm not nervous anymore. The trick is to be calm, inner calm, not just to look calm. You know there are people, and I know how to do it too, to look very calm and fully under control. It's a very useful ploy in business and industry. And underneath, people are going like ducks, they're spinning and their gears are moving, and they're nervous wrecks on the inside. Well, I think it's very important not to be a nervous wreck on the inside, don't you? Inner calm. And I can show you, I will share with you what I learned from these people these 50 people, of how to have inner calm regardless of external circumstances, simply by choosing thoughts which work, effective thoughts. I don't care how flaky you are on the inside, that can be changed simply by taking self-responsibility, identifying some thoughts that will work for you, and then choosing them. The other ingredient, it's not enough to just have inner peace when we study self-esteem and life satisfaction. It's not enough just to be calm. What else is missing? Purpose and meaning. Somebody mentioned this right at the beginning. These high achievers and these people with high self-esteem, they had purpose and meaning in their life. And I don't know what the meaning of life is. Do you? Maybe you do. Maybe I do. I don't know. But I can help you find for yourself a very special and unique purpose. When you were born, the mold was broken and thrown away, right? There's never been anybody like you in the history of the world. And when you go, God spare you, but he won't. When you go, there'll never be anybody quite like you again. One of a kind. Purpose and meaning. We each have lodged within us a very unique and special purpose, which is often found out of allowing loneliness into our life. Reisman, the famous sociologist, said the biggest problem in America, and he wrote this in the 50s, and I think it's just as true today, in his famous book, The Lonely Crowd. Remember that work? The Lonely Crowd. He talked about the inner directed person and the outer directed person. And he said we got a lot of outer directed people in the United States who are waiting for others to tell them how to think and how to feel and how to behave. You know, how am I doing? How should I be feeling? A lot of that. And what he suggested was we need more inner directed people, and he found that in his study of inner directed people that they did not run from loneliness. He said the biggest problem in America is not loneliness, but loneliness anxiety, or the fear of loneliness. And people are so afraid of loneliness that they get busy, not with business, but with busyness. They equate motion and activity with progress. If motion and activity were to equate with productivity, people that chew gum would be very productive because they're constantly in motion, but there's no correlation between the two. Purpose and meaning. And the way to discover your purposes and meaning, I was told by the uncommonly successful people that I studied, these people that had high self-esteem, was to have gone out and failed. Each and every one of these people had been a magnificent failure and had, interestingly enough, every one of the 50 people in this international research study had undergone a major setback in their life. A major setback, maybe a broken marriage, or a loss of a loved one, or they got fired on a job, or they failed on a project. But it was like a broken bone. Instead of breaking it and leaving it bad, it got better. And not only was it better, it was stronger than before. So if you haven't failed yet, if you haven't gone out and suffered or had a major setback, and you're interested in joining the 4% Club, before I go any further, before you stay here for this talk, I recommend you go out and fail and suffer and have some kind of setback, and then find that you can handle it. Very useful. And the third ingredient necessary for a rich and satisfying life or satisfaction was to have adventure. It's not enough. See, what's missing? If you're nice and calm and you know what you want. I'm calm and I know what I want. What's missing? Fun. You want to have a little fun, a little adventure, a little surprise. And these three ingredients, as well as many other ingredients, can be produced by thoughts that have nothing to do with the outside world, which are completely available to any person who wants to pause and choose thoughts which work. And I'd like to share with you what I would call the ET process, and I'll get back to those three things in a minute. Here's a sentence, and this entire talk will really revolve around this little sentence. Whenever necessary, and I think if you take this sentence home with you and apply it, you'll set yourself up immediately for three-dimensional success. Whenever necessary, and I'll talk about that in a moment, pause, and you know the reason for that, to break self-defeating mindsets, because we're all in a hypnotic spell. Then choose ETs. Now, an ET stands for an effective thought. Whenever necessary, pause, then choose ETs. I'll move up and back, but I'll always be talking about that sentence.